1,000 words on that, so do not exceed the limit. The due date is the 16th of October, so that's what, about 6 weeks from now. But on the 9th of October, or by the 9th of October, you can submit a draft, and I would advise you to do that. Submit a draft, and I'll give you a bit of feedback on that, and then you're able to kind of make any changes that are necessary, and then submit the essay. So do take advantage of the opportunity to have a draft and send that in. So what are we looking for in terms of this exercise? The criteria says your essay will be marked according to your ability to set out full bibliographical information. Now tomorrow we'll have another session on book reviews, so we'll talk a bit more about what that means, full bibliographical information. So we'll talk a bit more about that tomorrow. Explain what the author is attempting to achieve by writing the book. Thirdly, offer a brief and accurate summary of what the book covers. Fourthly, evaluate whether the author achieves what he or she sets out to achieve and the book's strengths and weaknesses. And importantly, for this exercise, demonstrate accuracy in spelling, grammar, and syntax. Since this is a study skills exercise, there's a bit more weight given to that than there will be on other assignments. So, so you will be getting wrapped over the knuckles if you're missing your apostrophes or whatever. So we will be in particular looking out for that. So if you're thinking, what on earth is a book review all about? I say tomorrow we'll have a short session on reviewing books, and you'll get some idea. One thing to mention in regard to this is you're reviewing the book, so you're not researching the topic. You're simply reviewing the book, so you don't need to read 4 other books about the revelation of God. It's simply that one book, so it's a single book review, and as I say, we'll cover a bit more about that tomorrow. Okay, assignment part 2, sorry, that's worth 25% of your marks. Part 2 then is also worth 25% of your marks, and that is to electronically access and summarise 3 articles from the reading list below. So again, you've about half a dozen articles there. So part of this exercise is to be able to go on to the various facilities we have to find online articles. So again, Davey will explain to you how you do that, and then so you need to find the article, and then you need to summarise it. Now, remarkably, this actually, all the students find this a much tougher exercise than the first one. So you have a wee bit of room to play about with 1,000 words, but here you have roughly 300 words per article. So that's a bit more of a challenge to summarise an article in 300 words. Again, tomorrow we'll talk a bit more about what's involved in summarising an article. Again, in case you're wondering where on earth did I start with this and why should I bother with this, we'll think a little bit more about that. Tomorrow. And again, if you look at the marking criteria, set out full bibliographical information. Again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Summarise the overall argument and the main points in each article. And again, demonstrate accuracy in spelling, grammar, and syntax. And again, each of the summary should be approximately equal in length. So again, if one of them is 350 words and the next one's 310, we're not going to fall out with anybody, but you're roughly the same weight given to each of the articles. Again, you're allowed a draft for this, so again, there's an opportunity to send in your draft. So again, I would encourage you to kind of take advantage of that. So that's by the 20th of November. Assignment then, part 3, is the essay part of this. So this is 50,000 words, or sorry, 50. It's not 50,000 words. No. Just thought to see if anybody was worried there. I could see if you people got 50,000 words, no problem. So it's worth 50%. So this is the actual assignment. So the question for that is critically evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the Wesleyan quadrilateral as a tool for doing theology. So again, there's going to be a particular weight on this on presentation issues, but again, part of this is also to introduce you into the area of theological study. So this is something that will make you think a little bit about what it means to study a subject theologically. So again, there's a little bit of kind of stretching for students in this. I'm beginning to think about what's involved in the postgraduate study of theology. Don't worry if you've never heard of the Wesleyan quadrilateral. That's what the assignment's about. To go away and find out about that. So don't panic. Don't panic about that. Now again, there's a draft available for that, 15th of January, and the final assignment to be handed in by the 29th. So there's a little bit of a longer gap there. That's because we don't want everybody landing in their draft on the 15th of January, and then I have to correct them and send them back. So it's to give me a little bit of time to respond to that and for you to make any necessary changes. In terms of the marking criteria, if you look at that one, it says your essay will be marked according to the generic marking criteria of knowledge and understanding, cognitive skills, practical or professional skills, and communication skills as set out here. So again, there'll be once you have your Chester number, you'll be able to click a link and go to that, and this will be available on the Moodle site. So you'll be able to do that. If you want to know what that is, if you look in the handbook you received, the postgraduate handbook, there's a section there on assessment criteria. So again, look at the handbook and look at the assessment criteria. That's the generic kind of criteria that all assignments are marked with. So you're going to be graded with regard to those particular criteria. It would also be handy tomorrow for the marking exercise that we'll do if you could bring a copy, if not the whole handbook with you, at least have access to that marking criteria. So that will be useful for tomorrow afternoon for the marking exercise. So please bring that with you. If you forget, I mean, we can photocopy a copy for you, but it'd be better again if you were able just to bring that yourself. So it'll also then be more specifically marked. Again, display your understanding of the key terms. So you're going to find out about the Wesleyan quadrilateral. I wish they'd call it something else because I can't say quadrilateral. And it's this idea really with quadrilateral that your theology is informed by four sources: Scripture, experience, reason, and tradition. So these four things go together to form our theology. I prefer that one to be Bible rather than Scripture, because then you have a nice little acronym called BERT. So Bert is the guy who shapes your theology, not Calvin, Wesley, or anybody else, but Bert. So it's that idea. So we're going to be looking for you in this essay to think a little bit about, well, okay, not only the quadrilateral itself, but what do we mean when we talk about Scripture and experience and reason and tradition. So again, you might think tradition is what we do every Sunday night in Whitehead Baptist Church, but the Wesleyan quadrilateral might have a slightly different definition of tradition. So again, just showing your ability to understand the key terms in this. Again, show your skills of critical evaluation. So again, that's something you're developing at this stage. So again, you're thinking about this quadrilateral. Does it have strengths? Does it have weaknesses? Are all the four parts of it, do we need to keep those in balance? Or is there priorities given to any of them? So those kinds of questions maybe be in your mind. Again, communicate your ideas clearly. So again, you've thought a little bit about that this morning on how to write an essay. Can you communicate the ideas clearly? There's no point in you saying, yeah, I really understand this if you can't tell me, if you can't explain that to me. So again, the clear communication of ideas. Provide a reasoned answer with supporting evidence. So again, it's not enough to look at this and say, all that experience business, that's a load of nonsense. That's not a critical evaluation. So again, your ability to provide a reasoned answer and supporting evidence. What is your evidence for the kinds of claims that you are making? Then fifthly, construct a full and accurate bibliography. So again, Davey will be talking a bit about that with you either today or tomorrow, how you go about constructing a bibliography. And again, that is something that must be clear, it must be accurate, it must be according to the referencing conventions that we use in the college. So again, Davey's going to be talking a bit about that. So I'm not sure whether he's doing that today or tomorrow morning. And again, the rule friend number 6, demonstrate accuracy in spelling, grammar and syntax. And again, there'll be a particular weight given to that again. There's a reading list for this. It's rather maybe incorrectly called a reading list because there's a video in the middle of it. Again, there's some perspectives on this. Some of it will require a little bit of digging around. You might want to begin with a video, for example, by Latz, where she discusses what is the Wesleyan quadrilateral. So again, just to kind of familiarise yourself with that. Again, some books there on constructing our theology. There are various sections that are relevant in the Oxford Handbook of Systematic Theology. So in terms of your reading, that might be a good place to begin. There's somebody thinking about sola scriptura in the Wesleyan quadrilateral. These two things are in conflict. So I think there are a number of things there that are helpful maybe to begin with. Okay, so those are the 3 assignments. Then you'll find as you go on, then there are some general guidelines about how to submit your essay. So we will not see any paper from you. All submissions are online. And again, Davey will talk a wee bit either today or tomorrow about how you do that along the way. There's a section then on length, about the length of your essay, but also important to read through that is to understand what's included in your word count and what's not. If your name's Jeremiah Matrustry, Fleming the Third, you're thinking that's an awful lot in my word count. Well, no, that's not in your word count. So again, understanding what's included in the word count and what's not is an important thing. You need to state your word count as the first line of your essay. You need to include your anonymous assignment or J number. Again, Davey will talk a wee bit about that with you. Pretty standard formatting. It's an A4 page double spaced, effectively size 12 font. Don't worry about margins and things like that. That's a bit of a carryover really from the days of when people were submitting things on paper. Davey's going to talk a bit then about academic integrity and a bit about referencing as well. But again, just read the handout on that. In terms of marking, as I said to you on Monday, the pass mark for this module overall is 50%. So you need to score above 50%. As with all our marks, you will be given a provisional mark. So when all of this is over, you'll be given a provisional mark for each part of the assignment. You'll be given the marker's comments. As we said, you need to read that. You get this within a month. It's actually 20 working days. So that's slightly erroneous. You get your mark and your feedback within 20 working days, but you don't get a final mark until the exam board. So in this case, you won't get a final confirmed mark until June. I think it will be May or June. So your mark will be confirmed. So again, this is helpful sometimes. The students sometimes think, I've been terribly harshly done by. David, look, he's got it out for me. He's really going to hammer me with this. But the truth is, it goes to an external examiner, and if he thinks I've been hard on you, he'll say, no, this person deserves an extra 5 marks, an extra 50 marks, whatever, depending on how harsh how harsh I've been. But as they say in all the best ads, that can also go down as well as up. So if he thinks I'm the soul of generosity, he can also bring you down. It's very, very rarely that happens, but sometimes it does. The marker says, well, we need to push this up a bit. And the external examiner is usually in the student's favour. So if he can see any grounds for kind of bumping it up a bit, the external examiners tend to be pretty generous and say, well, push this into the next category, give them another 5 marks or 10 marks or whatever that is. So what I would like you to do is to go home this evening and read through this, and then we'll have an opportunity tomorrow if there are any questions that you have about it, rather than maybe kind of reflex kind of what am I going to do, but maybe tomorrow, as I say, we can take any questions when you've had an opportunity to read about it and think about it. And I say things like article summaries and book reviews we'll talk about a bit more in detail tomorrow. So I say don't be panicking if you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just 1 second. So just I say in terms of say those, we'll explain those tomorrow. Maybe a little bit more happy with an essay kind of pattern, but I say don't panic if you're unfamiliar with the other types, because we can say we will look at that a wee bit more depth tomorrow. Sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
So do the drafts go to you directly?
Yeah, so sorry, so again, that would have been a helpful thing to put in. Yeah, a draft, if you just email me your draft, you don't have to submit it online. And one of the reasons, again, Dave will talk about this, is it's submitted online is so we can check for academic malpractice, as they talk about, or used to talk about in primary school, copying. So if there's any copying going on, it's to catch you out. So are there any other immediate kind of questions?
Can you steer us a little bit just on the books? I know we're going to do library tomorrow, but there's in the second one, there's quite a large number of books.
Yeah.
On the. Tell us what to read.
Sorry, this one, the first part. Sorry.
It's the.
The book review.
Even the third one, the reading list for Simon 3, for example.
Yeah. There's a wee bit more kind of, as I say, kind of researchy, bit more of a researchy element in that. So I say this is designed to push you a little bit, in terms of that. And let me think about that overnight, and I'll kind of give you more of a steer in that tomorrow, rather than just talking off the top of my head now. I'll do that. No, that's not a problem. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? No. Well, you maybe have questions when you home tomorrow or home this evening, and you're saying to your better half or whoever it might be, what have I let myself in for? But say that might occur.
Sorry,
Yep.
See the first one.
Yep.
So pick one book and do a review.
Yep.
Surely your bibliographical information will be one book.
Yep.
Is that?
That.
Okay.
Yep. And we'll talk about that again tomorrow. But yeah. Top of the class.
So how many marks will that be?
I'm sorry, Phil, you've used up your draft for that question. Okay, I'll leave you in Davies. Thanks, you.
It's very sharp, isn't it?
Finding being sharp is the quickness of it gets me.
That's what you didn't figure out. You have the parts of the ones, you have to read all of them, because if some of them, like,
It seems
The
to
same,
specific
like-
pages and
Yeah,
these other
yeah.
ones, because I've noticed that it's only the first question that sort of gives you reading list specifically, whereas everything else has particular page numbers.
yeah,
And I'm thinking then, I'm assuming that's just to ease us in gently to kind of, here's exactly the part you should read.
yeah.
I think it's a case that makes you use your skills of skimming and
Yeah, just
scanning and
focus
stuff
on what's
and all, and
necessary. Yeah, absolutely.
trying to sum it all down.
Maybe pick and choose which ones are most helpful rather than trying to stick 20 of them into. 2,000 words.
It probably helps the referencing because you don't actually then have to go looking for it. So straight off the bat, you go, that's what I'm looking for.
If they've done it right.
That's what that's it. There's going to be a couple to catch you out there. Afternoon, everyone. I not only get the most exciting topic of study skills, but also the best slot as well whenever you've been sitting in class all day, and I get to talk to you about academic integrity and plagiarism. How exciting. We'll try to make it as relevant as possible. So, for those who don't know me, my name's David Ellison. I am the Director of Training here at Irish Baptist College. My home church is Antrim Baptist. I serve as an elder there, in addition to teaching here and administrating here. And as well as being staff, I'm also a student of the Irish Baptist College as well. I'm completing doctoral studies, so hopefully I'm closer to studying and have more sympathy for you than maybe the previous tutors who have been in. It's been a wee while since they've been studying as students and maybe have less sympathy for you, who knows. Let me begin. I love reading, so let me begin with book recommendation. Excellence by Andreas Kostenberger. Just very helpful for thinking through academic study as a Christian and how that can benefit your Christian walk and how your Christian walk should influence how you conduct your studies. So, Excellence by Andreas Kostenberger. You don't have to go get it, but I'm going to encourage you to maybe put that on your to-read list, which is probably quite long at this moment in time, but you can add that to it anyway and maybe get to it before you finish your MA in 3 years or however long you're going to hopefully complete that in. So I've got 2 topics to do with you. I'll try to finish at 3 and let you guys away a little early this afternoon and work through this. One is academic integrity, so we're going to talk a little bit about plagiarism, just how to avoid that and detail the seriousness of that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about writing then, and presentation really, so just some details on that presentation and writing for your essay, or essays, which I think is what David was speaking with you about just there now. I'm happy to be interrupted, so if there's a question, fire your hand up, and I'm happy to be interrupted and answer questions or dodge questions, whichever will be necessary, depending on your question. So let's start academic integrity, plagiarism. This issue is of utmost importance in scholarship at large, and for those who are studying biblical theological studies, we should welcome and embrace the desire to work well with academic integrity and with plagiarism. Pointed to Kostenberger. This is what Kostenberger writes in that book. There is hardly a more deadly ethical violation of the ethos of academic work. If you plagiarize, you are engaging in a form of theft, stealing the intellectual property of others. What is more, you bring dishonor to the God whom you serve and with whom you have chosen to publicly identify. Of all students, it is those engaged in biblical and theological studies who should hold to impeccable standards when it comes to respecting and referencing the work of others. So study skills is perhaps not exactly the module that you signed up for, and whenever you're thinking about MA studies, it was maybe leadership in the pastoral epistles or church history of some description or Christology. But this is not a mere tick box exercise. A discussion on academic integrity is important for us. It's vital for protecting our contributions to scholarship. however meagre we view them in our own eyes, and we want to protect our contributions to scholarship, and we want to be diligent on this front with the outworking of our witness as Christians as well. So that's why we're talking about academic integrity and working towards that. The University of Chester, you'll have this in your handout. This is how they define or talk about academic integrity in the handbook. So hopefully David has made the handbook available for you. So make sure that you peruse that. But this is what they say there on academic integrity. The University of Chester values its students' contribution to the necessary quality of its academic standards and awards by adhering to the principles of academic integrity and fair play in assessment. These standards are upheld when students completing work for assessment act honestly and take responsibility for the fair presentation of the contents of any work they produce for assessment. This means that students will do nothing that has the potential for them to gain an unfair advantage in assessment. So that's what they talk about. And then they go on in the handbook to encourage students to abide by the following conventions. And so we want to talk a little bit about these. So to maintain academic integrity, students should acknowledge all sources of information, knowledge and ideas used when completing work for assessment by consistently and correctly using an acceptable referencing system. We'll talk about that tomorrow. We're going to talk about using the internet and also about referencing. So we'll talk about a referencing system and style tomorrow. The student should produce work that is the product of their own individual efforts, unless a specific assignment requires one piece of work to be submitted on behalf of a group of students. For you guys working at postgraduate level, all your work will be your own piece of work. More undergraduate level that works in groups in terms of submitting work. So it has to be the product of your own individual effort. Students should declare when they have used work in a previous assignment using an acceptable referencing system. We'll talk about that as well. Students should present accurate information and data that has been obtained appropriately, and students should adhere to and comply with all applicable regulatory, legal and professional obligations and ethical requirements therein. So this is what you're striving for, to ensure that your work has academic integrity and that you avoid plagiarizing. Any questions on that?
Just number 3 there, Davey, I'm assuming that's if you've written an essay in the past and you're quoting yourself, is that correct? Or?
Yeah, quoting yourself or relying on something that you've done earlier. So maybe if you this would probably happen in your dissertation if you're doing it on a similar theme to one of the modules, and maybe one of the module essays you'd reviewed a piece of work, a journal article or something you've reviewed, you make some conclusion, you might want to reference back to that. Probably doesn't happen all that often, but that would be the scenario that might occur. Okay, so if that's what we're aiming for, perhaps one question is, what constitutes a breach of academic integrity? The handbook states that it should be obvious that a breach of the academic integrity policy may occur when a student knowingly acts in a way that is contrary to the policy, or does so inadvertently by means of scholarship. Inexperience, intention, lack of intention, or unfamiliarity with the academic integrity policy will not be regarded as a defence in the event that the policy is breached. So it's important to note there that intention or lack of intention, inexperience or unfamiliarity with the policy is not regarded as an acceptable defence against plagiarism and academic malpractice. Okay, so you can't just plead ignorance. That's not going to work. So you must make yourself aware of these things, and then avoid them. These are the breaches then that are provided by the University of Chester. This list is not exhaustive, just representative of breaches. So repeating the work of others verbatim without acknowledgement, downloading or purchasing a piece of work and claiming it as your own, commissioning a piece of work from a ghostwriter. Number 4 is probably the one that perhaps we can come closest to breaching without intending to do so. That is working with other students on an assignment when you should be working alone, also known as collusion in the academic world. So it's a hard balance because you want to talk to each other and wrestle with ideas and themes and subjects for your assignments, but you have to be careful that the two of you don't go away and write the same paragraph on the same thing in your piece of work. So you're able to engage with fellow students, but you should be careful that that doesn't overstep a line into working together to produce similar pieces of work. Number 5, paraphrasing the work of others without acknowledgement, and I'll hand out a piece of paper at the end of this section where we'll see how that can be done in a way that's unhelpful. Incorporating material from the internet without referencing the author, URL, DOI. Fabricating references in an assignment. Falsifying data in an assignment, which is maybe more akin to scientific work rather than our kind of work in the humanities. And cheating in assessment or examination to gain an unfair advantage over fellow students. So like I said, the list is not exhaustive but representative. It's possible to breach the academic integrity policy in ways not stipulated there. The warning that comes along with that is that in our electronic age, it's increasingly common that those who breach academic standards will be caught. So Wendy Laura Belcher, who has written on this quite helpfully, asserts that being caught is no longer a lottery. It's an absolute that a plagiarized article will be caught. So plagiarized work will be caught. There's no way of escaping that in our electronic age. And whenever you submit your pieces of work, you'll submit it through Turnitin, and they automatically go through a plagiarism check. And so whoever's marking your piece of work will get a percentage of your work that will be similar to other people's work. So it could be 40%, and that might be okay because you look at the bits that are highlighted and it's all quotations or certain names or Bible verses being quoted, so that's obviously going to show up in other places, but then it could be highlighting a full paragraph that's not referenced to anybody or credited to anybody else, and that's going to show up. So you're not going to get away with it, is basically what I'm trying to say. With that, you'll get caught in this electronic age. So that's what constitutes a breach, and breaches will be caught. So in line with that, then, how far should you take referencing? Since there are such serious consequences to being caught plagiarizing, for professionals it could bring their career to an end. For students it could result in expulsion from your course. And while we may be more lenient than most, Chester are looking over our shoulders as well, and will have a say in that if you do breach academic protocols. And like I said earlier, the consequences are the same for both intentional and unintentional plagiarism. There's no distinction made there in terms of the punishment. So the University of Oxford warns, sometimes students may omit to take down citation details when taking notes, or they may be genuinely ignorant of referencing conventions. However, these excuses offer no protection against the charge of plagiarism. Even in cases where the plagiarism is found to have been neither intentional nor reckless, there may still be an academic penalty for poor practice. And so I have notes here. What I'll do is I'll put them on Moodle on the Study Skills Moodle page, so you'll have access to that once you get your student number and logged on, and you'll have access to the full notes then at that point. And there's some links and stuff in the footnotes that you can follow to to read up on that. So that's the University of Oxford. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, there may still be academic penalty for poor practice. So how far should we take referencing? Here's a few guidelines that might help us as we think about that. First of all, it is unnecessary to reference something that is common knowledge or statement of fact. So for example, Martin Luther was born on the 10th of November 1483, or at least that's the consensus of scholars. The majority of sources on Martin Luther will tell you that's the date of his birth, so there's no need for you to reference anything. That information can be taken from anywhere. So that's a statement of fact, or generally agreed statement of fact, so it's unnecessary to reference that. So you don't need to do that. Secondly, it's unnecessary to reference everyone who has made a particular point. So for example, Don Carson argues that John, the Apostle John, is the author of the Gospel according to John. If you want to make that argument, it's sufficient to cite simply Carson. Now, if you read Carson's commentary, you'll see that he cites Bauckham, Blomberg, Morris, Westcott. There's no necessity for you to quote everybody who you've read who makes that one point. It's sufficient to quote just one source to make that point. Unless, of course, you're making the argument that numerous commentators come to the same conclusion, then it's legitimate to multiply those sources. But it's unnecessary to reference everyone who has made a particular point. It is unnecessary to include the Bible version that you're using in your bibliography. If you're making a point based on a particular version, just add that version in brackets after the quotation or in the reference. And it is also unnecessary to provide multiple references to an author if the context clearly demonstrates that you're indebted to the author's corpus, so all of their writings. So for example, Gerald Wilson is a scholar, Old Testament scholar, who worked on the Psalms before his passing. He argued for evidence of editorial activity in the Psalter in no less than 7 publications. So if you're talking about his influence on Psalms, you don't need to reference all 7 articles or publications. You can just reference probably his doctoral dissertation that was published, which is the seminal work that everything flows from. So you don't need to provide multiple references to all the different books on one issue by one author, if it's clear that you're indebted to all of those books or references or articles or whatever. So this is the guiding principle for referencing and for putting that in and how far you should take it. The guiding principle is to ensure that your reader has absolute clarity on whose words, interpretation, or argument is being employed at any one time. So let me repeat that. The guiding principle for the student is to ensure that your reader has absolute clarity on whose words, interpretation, or argument is being employed at any one time in your piece of writing. In other words, whose voice is speaking. So as you're typing your answer to your essay, whose voice is speaking? Is this your voice? Or is this a scholar? Or is it your voice heavily indebted to a particular scholar? Then you need to include a reference. So that should guide you. If in doubt, it's always safer to include a reference rather than exclude a reference. But if you have that idea in your mind of whose voice is this sentence, that helps with referencing. Any questions on those bits and pieces? I hope that's because it's clear and not because it's 2:30 and after lunchtime.
The only thing, especially with the sheer amount of stuff that'll be checked, if it's 5 words, is it the same as something else? It's not, if it's 5 paragraphs.
Yeah.
Obviously, so that the idea of inadvertently writing the same 10 words as someone.
No.
Ten lines,
Yeah.
is the same as someone.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I remember hearing this for the very first time, being terrified of every thought that I ever have belongs to someone else.
Yeah. And that's the reality as well, isn't it? You know, very few of us have a completely original thought, and if we do, we probably shouldn't be putting it in an essay. But it goes through a process in us and becomes ours, whereas other bits that don't. Okay. We're going to move on in just a moment to tips for avoiding plagiarism. But before we do that, this might help. And if you have some fears, like you've just stipulated, this may help us allay those fears a little bit. So these are examples of plagiarism, different examples. So what you'll see at the top of the first page is the source text. So quotation from Machen, Christianity and Liberalism. You can see the quotation. So different types of plagiarism. The first one is copying. And so in the text I've underlined the phrases that are verbatim from Machen. So, like you're saying, Johnny, if it was just the first bit, whatever judgment we may pass upon, if it was just that line, then that's okay. That's not plagiarism, we're going to overlook it. But it's not just that line, it's actually very similar and continues. There's a pattern then in the rest of that quotation. So there's no quotation marks used to indicate that this is the exact wording of the author. The author's name is not mentioned in example A either. And no reference is used, so that's blatant plagiarism. Now, notice that the writer has also rearranged and left out some of the original author's words, changing them slightly or rearranging them. That's often a student attempting to cover up the fact that they're quoting someone else and they think they're doing it, and actually they're telling you that they've actually copied someone else knowingly. So that's how that'll come up. And when you submit work through Turnitin, this is how it'll appear. Those phrases then will be highlighted because they occur verbatim, close together in that text. Example B is a little bit more of a judgment call. It's inadequate paraphrasing. So there's similarities here, and it's in two consecutive sentences that follow on. So the issue is that even though the words have been changed slightly, the ideas and the order in which they come are Machen's, but the student does not mention his name or provide a reference. So when summarizing the information, you need to ensure that it's changed enough. It's not enough to just change a few words. If it's going to be your work, the flow of the original author's thought cannot merely be copied unless you're going to reference it. Then example C, unidentified voices. So here the student has clearly tried to make the claim his own, but then draws on Machen for support. No reference is provided. Machen's name's not mentioned in the body of the text, even though his wording is used. But the student has done all of that without giving him credit. And what's more is we find it hard then to distinguish between the student's voice in this section and Machen's voice. So that's where that idea of whose voice is it that we're listening to comes into play whenever you're thinking about referencing and avoiding plagiarism. And then example D is plagiarism for this mere fact that the student has not put in quotation marks. So missing out quotation marks, and that's plagiarism. So it's just shoddiness, and that could be overcome very easily. So hopefully those examples kind of help you see the ways in which what you may argue is just a legitimate mistake in the academic world is actually seen as plagiarism and the using of someone else's materials and ideas. So how do we avoid plagiarism? 4 quick tips. First one is develop systematic note-taking. This is something in our electronic age has become less and less a thing. Lots of students just copy text from books into a Word document and then type an essay around that, and that's going to lead you into trouble. So the discipline of note-taking aids against plagiarism, but it also increases productivity and information retention in terms of engaging with other material. So have a note-taking system, and in that system ensure that it is obvious if a particular note is a verbatim quotation, if it's a paraphrase, or if it's the student's own comments or opinion on a piece of work. So whether that's color coding, whether that's different documents, or whether it's just pen and paper. I'm a bit old school, that's my preference. I have an A4 file block, and there's something about reading and having to write out a quote verbatim that you engage with it, you work it through your mind. So some form of note-taking where you know if you go back to write your essay in 3 weeks' time, that is a quotation, that is a paraphrase, that's my own comment on that quotation, and that avoids you then slipping into plagiarism. Secondly, use a reference management software program. Making use of this is super for compiling a database of sources that you'll use again and again in your essays, and also for ensuring that when you reference, the style is correct. So there's a number of different programs: EndNote, Mendeley, RefWorks, Zotero. Some of them you have to pay for, some of them have free versions. Belcher, who I quoted earlier, she highlights that it's often shoddiness and not immorality that leads to plagiarism, and some kind of reference management software program goes some way to aiding being tidy, making sure everything is appropriate. So that's helpful. Always revise your work. An author who revises their work regularly is unlikely to commit unintentional plagiarism. So even if a paragraph enters into your work and it is plagiarized to some degree, even if accidentally, if you're reworking that, the process of revision with the aim of improving the writing and the argumentation will ensure that that then becomes your piece of work as you change the wording, the order, the structure. So continue to revise. That's just good writing practice, and we'll mention that again. And then fourthly, and this is from Wendy Laura Belcher as well, I found this very helpful: aim for persuasion. Try to persuade your reader. She writes this: weirdly, narcissism, the obsessive desire to prove one's worth, is the very thing that leads people to be less themselves and more a borrowed version of others' selves. So the more you try to set yourself apart, and the more you're likely to sound like someone else by trying to copy the best scholar in your area of study. So instead of attempting to write the most stunning essay, a student might be better served by attempting to write the most persuasive essay. And in doing so, you're giving yourself to attempting to persuade someone, and that means that you are speaking. It's your voice then in the piece of work, rather than what Don Carson says on a particular topic. And that inevitably will lessen the danger of plagiarism. Okay, that's plagiarism done. You'll be glad to know. I'm glad to know that as well. You can appreciate it's not the most exciting topic to teach, and never mind listen to. So that's plagiarism done. Any questions or comments on that? Yes. I use Zotero.
Spell it?
Sorry?
Could you spell it?
Yeah, Zotero, Z-T-E-R-O, Zotero. Which is quite helpful and useful. I think RefWorks you have to pay for. EndNote, there's maybe a free version and a paid version. But Zotero is good. You build it into your web browser as an add-on, and then the same in your Word document as an add-on, and then when you come across a piece of work, then you're able to file it into Zotero, and then when you're citing it in your document, then it pulls it across quite easily. So it'll take a few days maybe playing around with it to get used to it, but once you're up to speed on it, it's very helpful. And so, for example, if you're writing, if you're doing your module on the pastoral leadership and the pastoral epistles, you'll be using commentaries all the time. You only need to file the details for a commentary once, then it's stored in that, and then you don't have to type in all the details again and again.
Okay.
So that's the one I use, which works okay.
And the third point on always revise, just understand, when you say always revise your own writing.
Your own writing, your own work, yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about that now as we come on to presentation and writing. But